very often you just want to create like a very quick mat. So, and you just have to create a new solid, then hit OK, then go to the modes, and then go to alpha mat. I mean, it's fine, and now you have your mat. But, it are a few steps, and it's something you just do so often. So, there is now this option. If we come up to the menu and click on Create Mat, it's just a quick mat created to the layer. And there's also, of course, a shortcut, which is Ctrl-Alt-Z, or on Mac, Ctrl-Z. By default, it's set at double the size of the current comp. So this is because, let's say this is parented to something, so there is some extra space, because very often then you will hit the border and it's not matting anymore. If you want the same as the comp size or even more, you can go to settings, matting, and set the default mat size here. By default, the collapse transformation switch is on. You can also change that. You can also create a multi-layer mat. So I can just select all of these 3 layers here and then hit create mat. And I'm going to call this shapes, for example. You can either use a custom mat layer or a mat from comp. I also want to double the size and enable the collapse transformation. And now you see that we have this multi-layer mat here, and it's matting to all layers. And there are also some extra functions. You can set it to either stencil alpha or silhouette alpha, set the opacity, invert it. Also in and out points are being respected. Let's say I already have a mat. So this circle, for example, I have created already a mat here. Now if I select these 3 layers and I hit create mat, hit OK. Now you see that this mat still exists, and I can create a new mat here, and I can merge these mats on top of each other. Later I show you how that works, because that is the merge mats function. I can use a multi-layer mat, or I can just use a group mat. So with the group header selected, I'll hit create mat, and similarly I can mat this. The advantage of using a group mat, of course, is if I add another layer here and I hit refresh connections, now this will be matted as well. You can delete a group mat just by selecting the group header again and executing create mat. What will also work is group mats within group mats. So here I have 2 groups. So I'm creating a mat here. And I can create another group mat within this group. And now only the layers contained in there get this group mat. I can also use external layers for a group mat. In this case, I have these water stripes basically that I animated and that are supposed to go up while the wave also forms. However, they now have to be matted to the wave, because as of now, as you can see, they go outside of it. And what I also want, I just want them to be, at the edges here where it's brighter. So I want to create a luma mat from the wave. I'm just going to select these wave layers here, and I'm going to create a pre-comp clone. I don't want a prime clone. Hit OK. Now I can use that as a luma mat. I'm going to hit create mat. And as it's the mat layer, I'm going to choose this luma here, and I'm going to hit refresh connections. For everyone that didn't watch the tutorial on clones yet, this is a different refresh than the refresh layout, so don't confuse them. And now it's just using the stencil alpha, but because of that, it's still going into, these areas where I don't want them. So I'm setting this to stencil luma. And now it's just matting, to the outside of this wave. And I can turn the mat on and off by clicking on the effect switch here. Alright, yeah. Looking good, nice and subtle, but it really adds, to the movement of the wave, I think, here. Okay, now I want to talk with you about how to merge mattes. So we have this shot here of this woman walking towards that car. And what I want to do there is create like a bit of a grunge texture on that bus here. So in order to do that, first I have, tracked the shot. In order to make a matte for the texture, I already keyed this bus here to make it easier. Now let's put in our texture, scale it down, change the blending mode to multiply. Okay, now I want to create the matte for it. So we have this key here, but we also need another matte to kind of mask the area that we want to use of that key here. And I want to parent that to the track. In order to do that, we need to create a new layer. And I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to call this area. Mask that out here. Okay, we can parent the whole thing. And then we see it will move with the track. We can also set it to collapse transformation, because later when we perform merge mattes, it will create the calculations effect. And it's always easier to have it on collapse transformation, because then you can very easily reference that layer with all its transforms. It's also possible to do it without collapse transformation, but it will get a bit trickier, and I'll show you why in a second. So I'm going to deactivate the matte layers for now, and I'm going to select the texture first. And after that, I'm going to select all the layers that I want to merge. So you can either already have a track matte to your layer and then select that track matte and the layers you want to add to it. Or if you don't have a track matte as of now, you can just select your base layer as the first layer, and after that you select all the layers you want to matte to it. And I have deactivated those, and in a second I'll show you why I did that. And now if we come up to the main panel and hold on Shift, we can click on Merge Mattes. And now we have merged our mattes. On top of that, we have what is called a matte collection group. You can identify that by that triangle here. And if we look inside, we have our two mattes here. And they're both enabled now. However, their opacity is set to 0%. And the good thing is that now, just because they're still enabled, we can move them around and thereby change the matte. And we can see here in the matte layer settings that the opacity is not set to from this layer, but to custom opacity. And this is defined here. So we can also move that around. We could also, for example, set it to the matte merge layer effect. And this is if we go to our matte merge layer here, we see that this also has an opacity slider here, and we can move that around. However, in this case, I want to set it to custom opacity. Hey, so sorry to interrupt, he is Konstantin from the future, and I wanted to show you a little feature I added in the meantime actually. So when you go to your layer now, to your matte layer, you see in the matte layer settings, you now have these two extra checkboxes, which is called invisible matte and show matte. And this means that the opacity is still set to 0%, but before that, if you wanted to see your key layer here, of course, I would see nothing and I would have to dial up the opacity. Now you just have this checkbox, so very quickly you can just show your matte again and then uncheck it if you don't want to see it again. And this happens to every layer that is put into this collection group here, that this will be turned into an invisible matte. However, you can of course enable it for any other matte layer that you're referencing with the matte merge. But I'll talk more about layers and matte collection groups and other matte layers in a later part of this tutorial. Just one little thing to know, with the opacity it will always be by default will be set to custom opacity. You can set it to from matte merge layer effect as well. However, you cannot set it to from this layer. It will turn back to custom opacity then, because of course the opacity of this layer will always be set at 0%. Alright, so this has been it from the future. So back to my older self then. Now let's look at our matte here. So this is the matte merge layer, and at first we see this is the key, and it was able to reference that key layer because it had the same transforms. So this is the key, and it's set to stencil alpha. The second by nature is always set to normal, so it adds to that matte. However, we don't want that. We want to stencil that. So we can go to the blending mode and set it to stencil alpha. We could also set it to silhouette alpha if we want to, but I want to set it to stencil alpha. And now we have created this matte successfully. Oops, I see the texture of course has to be parented to the track. Alright, let me just quickly add some curves here. Maybe add like a Gaussian blur to it. But now I want to create a third matte to everything. And I want to make a bit of a gradient here. So it kind of falls off. So the grunge texture kind of loses opacity towards the top. However, this time I want to do this with the roughen edges effect. And because this area layer is parented to the track, but we set it to collapse transformation. That's why it's easy for that calculations effect to, just reference that and also have all the transformations referenced. However, let's just do that as an example. If we were to have a layer here and we have our roughen edges effect on it, and this is parented to the track, and we have our collapse transformation on, let's look at it. We see that the structure itself won't move because every effect you apply to a layer with collapse transformation, the effects will be built on top of that, but not before the transformations. However, if we don't collapse the transformations and we move it around, you see that the structure will move with the layer. And this is what we want. Either you can just have a layer here and add it to the mud merge layer. Just doing it as an example here. First select the mud merge layer, then the second layer, and then execute merge mattes, which you can do by holding down Ctrl Alt Shift Z. And now it has been added here as an effect. However, there's also a quicker way. You can select either your base layer or the mud layer and then execute create matte on it. And now we can name it to border, but we want to disable the collapse transformation with this one. And now it has been added. But you already see on top of here a new mud collection group has been created, and if I open that up, this clone layer is inside of there. And if we look at the mud merge layer, the reference layer for the border layer, it's not this one, but if we look here, it's the clone layer. And this is because with a layer that doesn't have collapse transformation on, but we still want the transforms to be at the right position, we need to create a precomp clone because the precomp clone is fit to the comp size. And this is every time we don't have a layer that's neither on the comp size level, nor it is with collapse transformation. So now with this layer here, I can just create this border, and now I can add the roughen edges. And of course nothing is visible right now because I have to hit refresh connections. And now we have added this. We can crank this up a bit, scale it down. And then we can come up to the matte layer and set this to silhouette alpha, for example. We also have to parent it to our track. And of course now, because that's not part of the clone, we have to hit refresh connections again. And now everything is referenced and everything works out fine. This mud merge collection group always has to be on top of everything. If you want to move your layer around, you have to select all of these three layers here. Then of course hit select group to move it around. Why does it have to be on top of there? So let's say I have a new layer here I want to add to the mud merge. If you want layers to be added to the mud collection group, you always have to have the layer directly above the mud collection group, and it needs to be disabled. So now if I first select the mud merge layer and then the layer I want to add to it and hit merge mattes, you see that it will be added to this layer here, and it will also be added to the mud merge collection group. However, let's say it would be somewhere here and I would reference it. It will be added to the mud merge layer here, but it won't be added to the mud merge collection group. And this is because sometimes you just want to reference a layer that is not specifically a matte for this base layer here, but it's just a general layer within your comp. Also, if the layer is enabled and it's directly above, it also won't be put into the mud collection group. it always has to be disabled. If you don't like the whole concept of mud merge collection groups and all of that stuff, you can come up to the settings, go to matting, and uncheck collect merged mud source layers and group above mudded layer. You can also convert your groups. So let's say you have a group and you don't want this to be a mud collection group anymore, then you can just select it and execute merge mats on it. And that way, you see, we have now lost this icon here and turned it into a regular group. And the same goes if you just do that again and you get this icon again, and now it's a mud collection group. Mud collection groups are also unique in the sense that their label color cannot be changed. So I can change that, but it won't have any effect. But if I change the actual group color, the label of the contained mud collection group will be changed as well. Let's say you, for example, change a name. You don't call this border, but rough and edge or something. And then you go to your mud merge layer. The effect itself still will be called border. And it's a bit difficult sometimes to see which layer you're actually referencing, because by this drop down, it's kind of difficult to see. And sometimes it's also just the clone layer. So in order for that effect to have an updated name, you just select your mud merge layer and then execute merge mats. And that way, as you can see, the name has been updated.